How many years had the silence lasted? Elena swept the cool terracotta tiles of the small entranceway, the rhythmic shush of the straw broom, the only sound besides the distant, drowsy drone of cicadas already tuning up in the Andalusian heat. 48 years they'd been married. Had the silence begun 10 years ago, when Matteo finally shuttered his dusty workshop, the last demand for his intricate ceramics drying up like the riverbed in August? Or 15, when the disastrous attempt to expand, fueled by foolish pride and borrowed money she'd scraped to repay, had crashed around them? Or had it always been there, a quiet fissure beneath the surface, widening imperceptibly with each passing year, each unspoken resentment, each solitary burden carried? She paused, leaning on the broom, her gaze drifting towards the small, walled patio. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight, piercing the leaves of the neglected orange grove. 4 trees, planted in the hopeful bloom of their youth, now stood choked by weeds, their branches tangled and barren, leaves coated in a fine white dust. A mirror, she thought, her mouth tightening, a mirror to the state of things within these thick, whitewashed walls. Matteo sat out there sometimes, on the rickety wooden bench under the largest tree, not seeing the neglect, just staring towards the hazy blue line of the Mediterranean visible between the village rooftops. Staring or sleeping. It was hard to tell these days. Her hands, still capable despite the fine network of wrinkles, tightened on the broom handle. She'd run the little Ultramarinos, the neighborhood grocery, for nearly 40 years, managing accounts, ordering stock, serving gossip alongside olives and bread. Practicality was etched into her bones. She'd kept them afloat, always. While Matteo had chased beauty, shaped clay into fleeting forms, lived in a world she glimpsed, but never truly entered. Now, retirement hung heavy on them both. For her, it was a loss of routine, of purpose. For him, she suspected it felt like an ending. He was adrift, a boat cut from its moorings bumping silently against the dock of old age, and the silence between them had grown cavernous, echoing with everything unsaid. She finished sweeping, the small pile of dust a meagre testament to her morning's effort against the entropy of the house, of their lives. Matteo sat on the bench, the rough wood familiar beneath his worn trousers. He wasn't sleeping. He was listening to the village wake up. The clang of the gas bottle delivery truck down the hill, Senora Carmen shouting for her cat, the distant bells of San Miguel marking the quarter hour. Sounds that had woven the tapestry of his life. He picked up a fallen dried orange leaf, crumbling it between fingers that still remembered the feel of wet clay, the satisfying resistance of shaping something from nothing. Useless now, those hands. Good only for holding a small glass of vino or gripping the walking stick Elena insisted he take, though his pride balked. He saw Elena moving inside, her figure silhouetted against the cool dimness of the house. Efficient, always efficient. Tidying, organizing, managing. Had she ever understood the fire that had burned in him when he worked? The thrill of pulling a perfect vase glaze gleaming from the kiln? He doubted it. She saw only the mess, the impracticality, the precarious finances. The failed expansion, that still stung. His dream of a larger workshop, apprentices, his name known beyond the village, turned to ash and debt. Elena had salvaged things, her tight-lipped disapproval a constant reproach. And something within him had shuttered then, a door closed against further hurt, further misunderstanding. Retirement hadn't been a relief, it had been the final nail. His purpose, the identity forged over decades at the potter's wheel, had evaporated, leaving this husk of a man sitting under a dying orange tree. He sighed, a shallow breath barely disturbed the heavy morning air. Easier to be silent. Safer. Less chance of saying the wrong thing, of seeing that familiar look of exasperation, or worse, pity, in Elena's dark, observant eyes. He closed his own, listening again to the cicadas, letting the sun warm his face, retreating into the quiet landscape of memory. Lunch was gazpacho, cool and sharp with garlic, served with crusty bread. They ate at opposite ends of the heavy wooden table in the Commodore. The dining room Elena kept meticulously clean but rarely used for guests anymore. The clink of spoons against ceramic bowls, the scrape of chair legs on tile, these were the sounds of their shared meal. Matteo finished first, pushing his bowl away. He reached for the small pitcher of local red wine, his hand trembling slightly as he poured a glass. Elena watched him, her lips pressed thin. "Just one, Matteo," she said, her voice low but firm. "The doctor." Matteo flinched, setting the pitcher down with a thud. "I know what the doctor said, woman." His tone was rough, defensive. Silence fell again, thicker this time, charged with resentment. Elena began clearing the dishes, her movements precise, economical. Matteo stared out the window, swirling the wine in his glass. Suddenly he gasped, his hand flying to his chest. The glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the tiles, ruby liquid spreading like blood. He slumped forward, his face contorted, breath coming in ragged wheezes. "Matteo!" Elena cried out, fear momentarily erasing everything else. She rushed to his side, her practical mind kicking in. Check breathing. Loosen collar. "Call Javier?" "No, emergency services first." Her fingers, surprisingly steady, fumbled with the old rotary phone on the sideboard, dialing the number for the local clinic's emergency line. She spoke calmly, giving their address, describing the symptoms, her voice a beacon of control in the sudden chaos. But inside, a cold terror gripped her. To lose him? After all this? The thought was unbearable, unthinkable, even amidst the years of silence and distance. She knelt beside him, murmuring reassurances she didn't feel, until the sound of the ambulance siren grew louder, closer, filling the quiet street outside. At the clinic, the doctor spoke of stress, high blood pressure, the need for significant changes. As Elena sat by Matteo's bedside in the small, sterile room, watching his pale, sleeping face, a new resolve hardened within her. This slow decay, this living death of silence, it had to end, one way or another. A few days later, Matteo was back home, subdued and sullen. Elena waited until after the simple evening meal, the air still thick with the day's accumulated heat. She took a deep breath. "Matteo," she began, her voice steadier than she felt, "we cannot continue like this." He looked up, wary. "Like what? Like this?" She gestured around the quiet room, encompassing the silence, the distance, the unspoken weight between them. "The doctor said stress. This." She tapped her own chest. "This life we are living, it is not healthy, for either of us." She paused, gathering courage. "Javier's wife mentioned a therapist in Malaga. Dr. Ramirez. People say she is very good." Matteo's face darkened. He pushed his chair back noisily. "Therapy, you mad, Elena? Therapy is for locos! We don't air our dirty laundry for strangers." His pride, momentarily weakened by the health scare, flared back defensively. "And what is this?" Elena countered, her voice rising with uncharacteristic force, fueled by the lingering fear and a sudden surge of desperation. "Sitting here in silence until one of us collapses, pretending everything is fine when it is breaking us both? Is that better than being loco? I cannot live like this anymore, Matteo. I will not." The words hung in the air, raw and final. She saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Surprise? Fear? He looked away, towards the darkening patio. The fight seemed to drain out of him, leaving him looking old and tired. He mumbled, not looking at her, "Do what you want." It wasn't agreement, not really. But it wasn't refusal either. It was enough. Elena felt a tremor run through her, a mix of relief and apprehension. She had pushed, and the wall hadn't crumbled, but a door had cracked open. Javier, when she called him later, sounded relieved. "It's a good step, Mama. A brave step. For both of you." Brave or desperate, Elena wasn't sure, but it was a step. The therapist's office in Malaga was cool and calm, decorated in soothing blues and creams, a stark contrast to the sun-baked streets outside. Dr. Ramirez was a woman in her 50s, with warm, intelligent eyes and a reassuring presence. Elena sat stiffly on the edge of the sofa, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Matteo slumped in the armchair opposite, arms crossed, gaze fixed on a nondescript painting on the wall. He looked like a prisoner awaiting sentencing. Dr. Ramirez began gently, asking about their life, their family, what had brought them here. Elena spoke hesitantly, focusing on practicalities, Matteo's health scare. Matteo offered little more than grunts and shrugs, his hostility a palpable force field. "It seems," Dr. Ramirez said after a while, her voice calm, "that communication has become difficult." Matteo snorted softly. Elena flushed. "Often in long relationships," the therapist continued smoothly, ignoring the interruption, "we fall into patterns. We stop truly listening. We assume we know what the other person thinks or feels. Today I want to introduce a simple idea. Listening not to respond, but to understand." She explained the concept of reflective listening, of trying to hear the feeling behind the words. Elena listened intently, absorbing the logic. It made sense. Matteo shifted impatiently, looking pointedly at his watch. He clearly thought this was nonsense. The session ended with an agreement to meet again next week, and a simple task: try, just once, to listen to each other for 5 minutes without interrupting. Elena left feeling a slight sliver of something akin to hope. Matteo walked beside her in stony silence, radiating disapproval. The drive back to the village was long and quiet, but this time the silence felt different, charged with the unspoken challenge of the therapist's words. Current part characters, 1999 total characters, were love and fought. At their next session, Dr. Ramirez listened patiently as Elena admitted they hadn't managed the 5 minutes of listening. It felt artificial, Elena explained. Matteo just shrugged, as if confirming the futility of it all. Dr. Ramirez smiled gently. That's understandable. Habits are hard to break. Sometimes talking directly about deep feelings is too difficult at first. Perhaps a shared activity would help. Something practical, side by side. She leaned forward slightly. Elena, you mentioned the patio? The orange trees? Elena nodded. They are very neglected. Since Matteo stopped, she trailed off. Matteo, Dr. Ramirez turned to him. You planted those trees together, didn't you? A long time ago? He gave a curt nod, a flicker of memory in his eyes. What if, the therapist proposed, alongside our talks, you were to take on the task of restoring that grove? Together, as a project. Elena looked surprised. It seemed like just another chore. Matteo frowned, but didn't immediately object. Working with his hands, even on neglected trees, perhaps appealed to something dormant within him. Think of it, Dr. Ramirez suggested, as tending to something that was once fruitful, something that needs care to thrive again. No pressure. Just work together when you can. See what happens. Back home, the idea hung in the air. A few days later, Elena saw Matteo standing by the grove, looking at the tangled branches, the weed-choked earth. He nudged a particularly stubborn clump of dried grass with the toe of his boot. Then, unexpectedly, he disappeared into the small shed at the back of the patio and emerged with a pair of rusty pruning shears and old gardening gloves. He started snipping tentatively at the deadwood on the nearest tree, his movements stiff at first, then gradually finding an old rhythm. Elena watched from the kitchen window, a strange mix of emotions swirling within her. She picked up another pair of gloves from the hook by the door and walked out onto the patio. Without a word, she began pulling at the thick weeds strangling the base of another tree. They worked in silence, meters apart, the only sounds the snip of shears, the rip of weeds from dry earth, and the ever-present hum of the cicadas. The following week, Dr. Ramirez asked about the grove. We started, Elena said non-committally. It needs a lot of work. Matteo? The soil is poor, he grumbled. Needs water, fertilizer. But he didn't sound entirely negative. Tell me about when you planted them, Dr. Ramirez prompted gently. Elena spoke first, remembering the excitement, the trip to the nursery, choosing the young saplings. Javier was small, she recalled. He kept trying to help by digging holes in the wrong places. A faint smile touched her lips. Matteo added, surprising Elena, the man at the nursery said they were a good variety, Valencia late, sweet oranges. He looked down at his hands. They bore well for many years. Dr. Ramirez used this opening. Sometimes, like the trees, relationships need tending, pruning away the old hurts, watering the roots of communication. She guided them back to the listening exercise, framing it differently. When you work on the trees, you notice things. A broken branch, a sign of disease. Try to notice things in each other's words. What is the feeling underneath? They tried again that evening, sitting awkwardly in the living room, the television off. Elena went first. I feel lonely, Matteo, she said, the words feeling thick in her mouth. Especially since you retired. It's like you disappeared. Matteo bristled. His default was defense. But he seemed to catch himself, perhaps remembering the therapist's words or the shared memory of the grove. He didn't speak immediately. He just looked at her, a long, considering look she hadn't seen in years. Lonely, he repeated, the word sounding foreign on his tongue. He didn't offer solutions, didn't argue. He just heard. It wasn't much, but it was more than silence. Elena felt a prickle behind her eyes. Work on the grove continued sporadically. Some days they worked in silence, the physical labor a neutral space. Other days, necessity forced brief exchanges. The hose doesn't reach this far. We need a saw for that thick branch. One afternoon, struggling with a particularly stubborn root, Matteo grunted with effort. Elena automatically came over, putting her weight behind the shovel alongside him. Together, they dislodged it. Panting slightly, they looked at the thick, gnarled root, then at each other. "Remember that time," Matteo said, wiping sweat from his brow, "when Javier tried to bury his treasure, that collection of bottle caps, under this very tree? We dug for an hour trying to find it." Elena laughed, a genuine rusty sound that surprised them both. He cried for days when he couldn't remember where he put it. The shared memory, the shared laughter, hung in the warm air, dissolving some of the tension. Later, as Elena gathered the pruned branches, Matteo silently picked up the heavier load and carried it to the disposal pile. A small gesture, unprompted, noticed. At their next therapy session, they recounted the incident of the root and the shared memory. Dr. Ramirez smiled. "See? Shared effort, shared history. These are strong roots." She gently pushed them further. "Elena, you mentioned feeling lonely, invisible. Can you say more?" Haltingly, Elena spoke of feeling like the housekeeper, the manager, taken for granted. "Sometimes I feel like you don't see me, Matteo, just the tasks I perform." Matteo listened, his usual defensiveness held in check, though Elena could see the effort it cost him. When it was his turn, prompted by the therapist, he spoke, his voice low. "A man should provide," he said, staring at his hands. "My craft, it was who I was. Now, these hands," he flexed them, "they feel useless, empty." It wasn't an excuse, but an explanation, a glimpse behind the wall of pride. Elena felt a pang of empathy, a feeling long buried under layers of resentment. He felt useless. She felt invisible. Perhaps they weren't so different after all. The grove began to show signs of change. Cleared of weeds, pruned of deadwood, the trees looked less burdened, greener. Watered regularly, the parched earth around their bases softened. One Saturday, Javier arrived with Sofia for their weekly visit. Sofia, now 10, bright and observant, immediately noticed the difference in the patio. "Abuela! Abuelo! The trees look happy!" she exclaimed, running towards the grove. "Are you making orange juice again?" Elena smiled. "Maybe soon, cariño." Sofia turned to Matteo, who was sitting on the bench, watching her. "Abuelo, did you fix them, like you used to fix the pottery?" Matteo hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Your abuela and I, we worked together." Elena caught Javier's eye. He raised his eyebrows slightly, a look of pleased surprise. The atmosphere during lunch felt lighter. There were still silences, but they seemed less heavy, less absolute. Matteo answered Sofia's questions about his old workshop, sharing a simple anecdote or two. Elena found herself adding details, correcting his memory playfully. They weren't exactly collaborating, but they were occupying the same space, the same conversation, more easily than they had in years. As Javier and Sofia left, Javier squeezed Elena's arm. "It's good to see, Mama," he murmured. "Whatever you are doing, keep doing it." Elena felt a quiet warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was the absence of the constant grinding ache of loneliness. And the grove, bathed in the late afternoon sun, seemed to hold a promise. The progress wasn't linear. There were days Matteo retreated into silence again, days Elena felt the old resentment simmer. But the shared task, the regular therapy sessions, provided a structure, a path forward. Dr. Ramirez decided it was time to address one of the core wounds. "Matteo," she said calmly in their next session, "Elena has expressed feeling burdened by the financial instability caused by the workshop expansion attempt years ago. Can you speak to that?" Matteo stiffened. "That was a long time ago. It failed. I know it failed." "But the feeling remains for Elena," Dr. Ramirez persisted gently. "The fear, perhaps? The weight of responsibility?" Elena spoke, her voice trembling slightly but firm. "It wasn't just the money, Matteo. It was... You didn't listen. I told you it was too risky. You poured everything into it, our savings, my savings from the shop. You chased a dream, and I was left to pick up the pieces. Again." The accusation hung in the air, decades of resentment distilled into those words. Matteo's face flushed. "You never believed in me," he shot back, the old hurt raw. "You only saw the cost. You never understood what it meant to me, my art, my soul. You wanted me to be like you, practical, careful, counting every peseta. You clipped my wings, Elena." Tears sprang to Elena's eyes. "I clipped your wings? I kept us from falling. I kept a roof over our heads while you—" "Enough," Dr. Ramirez intervened, her voice calm but firm. "Listen, both of you. Hear the pain behind the anger." Elena, you felt unheard, scared, burdened. Matteo, you felt misunderstood, unsupported, diminished. She looked from one to the other. Can you acknowledge the other's pain, even if you don't agree with their interpretation? The room was thick with tension. Elena looked at Matteo's face, seeing not just the stubborn pride, but the deep hurt he'd carried. Matteo looked at Elena's tear-streaked face, the rigidity of her posture, and saw not just criticism, but the fear she'd shouldered alone. Slowly, haltingly, they each managed a small acknowledgement. I hear that you felt unsupported, Elena whispered. Matteo mumbled, I hear that you were scared. It was excruciating, incomplete, but it was a start. They left the session drained, the air between them heavy with the dust of excavated history. The next afternoon, they worked in the grove. The silence was back, but it wasn't the hostile silence of before, nor the empty silence of estrangement. It was the quiet after a storm, fragile and uncertain. The trees looked transformed, pruned, watered, the earth around them dark and moist. Small, nascent green buds dotted some of the branches, promises of future blossoms. They had cleared almost the entire area. Matteo stopped working, leaning on his shovel. He surveyed their shared labour, the visible proof of weeks of effort. He walked over to the Valencia late tree, the one he'd pointed out weeks ago. A few small, slightly pale oranges, survivors from the previous neglected season, still clung to a lower branch. He carefully twisted one off. It was small, imperfect, but undeniably an orange. He turned, walking slowly towards Elena, who was bundling pruned twigs. He stopped in front of her, holding out the fruit. His expression was unreadable, sterile, his eyes searching hers. We did this, Elena, he said, his voice quiet, slightly rough. Together. Elena looked from the orange in his outstretched hand to his face. She saw the lingering hurt from the therapy session, but also something else. Vulnerability, perhaps an offering. The orange felt heavy with symbolism, the fruit of their difficult labour, imperfect but real. She reached out and took it, her fingers brushing his. The brief contact sent a surprising warmth through her. Yes, Matteo, she replied, her voice equally quiet. We did. She met his gaze, holding it for a long moment. No grand declarations, no apologies spoken aloud. But in that shared look, in the acceptance of the small, imperfect orange, a truce was declared. An understanding passed between them, fragile but deeply felt. The hard shell around Elena's heart seemed to crack just a little. Matteo's shoulders, usually held stiffly, seemed to relax fractionally. They stood there for a moment longer, the scent of orange leaves sharp in the warm air, before slowly, separately resuming their work. Months passed. Autumn painted the Andalusian hillsides in softer shades. The oppressive heat lifted, replaced by golden light and cooler evenings. The orange grove thrived. Glossy green leaves unfurled, and the branches grew heavy with ripening fruit, their skins turning from green to sunset orange. It wasn't a miraculous, overflowing harvest, but it was abundant, healthy, a testament to care and attention. Inside the house, a similar, quieter transformation had taken place. Elena and Matteo still had their separate routines. Matteo had unearthed some old blocks of modelling clay, setting up a small corner in the shed where he sometimes worked, shaping small, simple figures, birds, lizards, things he saw around the patio. Elena had taken up crocheting again, her fingers busy creating intricate patterns while she sat near the window in the afternoons. But the silences were different now. They ate meals together at the table, not in stony silence, but often talking quietly, about village news, Javier and Sophia, the progress of the oranges. Sometimes they sat together on the patio in the evenings, sharing a small glass of wine, watching the stars emerge. The silences now were comfortable, companionable, not voids but spaces filled with unspoken understanding. Therapy had ended a month ago. Dr. Ramirez had pronounced them ready to continue the work on their own. Remember, she had said, like the grove, a relationship always needs tending, communication, empathy, watering the roots. They weren't magically healed. Decades of habit couldn't be erased in a few months. There were still moments of friction, misunderstandings. Matteo could still retreat behind his pride. Elena could still slip into pragmatic criticism. But now they caught themselves more often. They tried the I feel statements, clumsy sometimes but attempted. They remembered to listen. They remembered the feeling of working side by side in the sun, bringing something neglected back to life. One crisp November evening, Elena brought out 2 glasses and a small plate of olives to the patio. Matteo was already there, sitting on the bench, looking at the trees laden with fruit. She handed him a glass, filled with the local red wine they both enjoyed. She sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "The oranges are beautiful this year," she said softly. Matteo nodded, taking a slow sip of wine. "Hard work," he murmured. "Yes," Elena agreed. "Good work." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the air filled with the faint, sweet scent of ripening citrus. Elena thought back to the beginning of the year. The suffocating silence, the despair, the fear after Matteo's collapse. It felt like another lifetime. She looked at Matteo's profile, the lines etched around his eyes, the stubborn set of his jaw softened, now in repose. He was still Matteo, the proud, sometimes difficult man she had married nearly 50 years ago. But she saw him differently now. She saw the vulnerability beneath the pride, the longing for purpose, the man who, despite everything, had stayed. "Matteo," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He turned to her. Thank you." He looked surprised. "For what?" For the oranges," she said, gesturing towards the grove. "For trying, with me." A slow smile touched Matteo's lips, reaching his eyes. He raised his glass slightly, a silent toast. "And thank you, Elena," he replied, his voice gruff but warm, "for not giving up on this old tree." He reached over hesitantly and covered her hand with his. His palm was rough, calloused from years of work, both clay and soil. Her hand felt small within his grasp. It wasn't the passionate clasp of youth, but something quieter, deeper. A connection reforged, strengthened by the shared understanding of their own imperfections, their shared history, their shared quiet determination to tend to the life they had built together, however flawed. The grove, bathed in the soft moonlight, stood as a silent witness, its branches heavy with the promise of sweetness after a long, hard season. They wouldn't be perfect, Elena knew. The grove would need constant care, pruning, watering. So would they. But now, finally, they were tending it together. Spring returned to the Pueblo Blanco, painting the hillsides with wildflowers and filling the air with the intoxicating scent of orange blossoms from their now revitalized grove. Elena and Matteo moved through their days with a new, quieter rhythm. The oppressive weight had lifted, replaced by a sense of acceptance and gentle companionship. They harvested the oranges together, filling baskets with the bright, fragrant fruit. Elena made marmalade, its sharp sweetness filling the kitchen. Matteo, his hands finding purpose again, carefully carved small figures from fallen orange wood, leaving them on the windowsill to dry. Sophia was delighted with the small wooden bird he gave her on her next visit. Javier noticed the change most profoundly. The strained silences during his visits were gone, replaced by easier conversation, even occasional shared laughter between his parents. He saw them exchange glances now, small communications that spoke volumes more than their previous years of silence. He saw Matteo instinctively reach to help Elena with a heavy basket. He saw Elena pour Matteo's wine with a fond exasperation rather than sharp disapproval. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was real. It was peace. One afternoon, Elena found Matteo sitting on the bench, sketching in an old notebook. She sat beside him, looking not at the sketch, but at his hands. The hands that had shaped clay, pruned branches, and now held hers sometimes in the quiet evenings. "What are you drawing?" she asked softly. He showed her, a simple sketch of the orange grove, focusing on the new blossoms promising the next harvest. "Thinking," he said simply, "about how things grow back, if you give them sun and water." Elena leaned her head against his shoulder, a gesture of easy intimacy that would have been unthinkable a year ago. The scent of orange blossoms enveloped them. They weren't young anymore, and the path ahead likely held challenges, health, aging, the inevitable losses that time brings, but they would face it differently now. Not as two strangers sharing a roof, isolated in their private pains, but as partners. Companions who had navigated the harsh winter of their estrangement and found in the tending of a neglected grove a way back to the warmth, back to each other. The silence now was one of contentment, holding the quiet understanding that even after 50 years, growth was still possible, together.